In the great immigration years of the 1880s in Canada, along with the Germans, Italians, and British, came a ragged assortment of Russians, the Doukabors, seeking religious freedom. But by the mid-1950s, newspaper headlines regularly focused on the activities of the Doukabors, and in particular a breakaway group called the Sons of Freedom. Initially, there was unrest within the Doukabor communes. Arson was considered a sacrament, and transgressors against the fundamentalist teachings of the sect had their homes and buildings burned. On occasion, they'd set fire to their own property in an attempt to return to a state of grace in the eyes of God. Nude protests were common, naked before God. The rest of the province watched in puzzlement as these events took place in towns like Crestova in the Creston Valley and Brilliant near Castlegar. It didn't take long before the fundamentalist sect began to quarrel with the government over issues like the education of their children, and the violence spread from the Kootenays to other regions of the southern interior of BC. Bus depots, railways, and schools, along with government buildings like post offices, now became the targets of the Doukabor bombers. Authorities were growing increasingly uneasy as the scheduled opening of the newly constructed Okanagan Lake floating bridge was about to be dedicated by royalty. Princess Margaret was going to cut the ribbon in mid-July. Just days before the ceremony, a number of bombs were detonated in the Okanagan. Police moved quickly and apprehended 5 suspects, beginning one of the rarest events in Canadian criminal law, a conspiracy trial. Associate prosecutor on the case was E.C. Weddell, QC, a longtime Kelowna lawyer. Assisting him was his son, Brian Weddell, fresh out of articling. On this episode of Pioneers in Places, Brian Weddell tells us the story of the terror and the trial of the Doukabor bombers of 1958. Welcome to Pioneers in Places. Mike Roberts with my guest tonight, retired Provincial Court Judge Brian Weddell, QC. And Brian, what I need to do just to get into this is to try and put myself in the position of all the British Columbia residents of the southern interior in the mid-1950s as bombs are going off at railways and bus depots and post offices. What's the feeling of the people?
Well, the feeling of the community basically was one of disbelief. We had heard, or that had been quite usual to hear of bombing incidents in the Kootenays. Then all of a sudden there was a series of these incidents that took place in the valley which confused everyone and ultimately led everyone to hold the not unreasonable belief that it appeared that we were under attack from terrorists.
And these all closely were associated with Princess Margaret's arrival here to open the floating bridge. There was every reason for the police to be very worried about her security and the security of everybody.
Oh, the opening of the bridge was a huge affair, and to get the royal house to agree to dispatch Princess Margaret to open it was rather a coup, and it was a huge celebratory event. And when these bombings started to happen, of course, everybody was fearful that it was again thought to be a background of something that might involve terrorists or continue the Doukabor dispute with various governments.
On the 28th and 29th of June, the major events that we're talking about today happened.
Yes, they did. There was several events. There was, first of all, as I recall, a pipe bomb that blew up on some telephone poles near Armstrong. That was on, I think, June the 28th. On virtually the same day, there was a bomb discovered aboard the ferry, the Laquim. That was discovered by a deckhand who was investigating a report of a toilet being plugged, which he investigated and found that indeed there was a device in there, which he then picked up and heaved into the lake. It was a bomb from the later description of it. Unfortunately, it didn't detonate, so he was saved the indignity of depth charging his own ferry. There was another one that occurred in the Allison Hotel in Vernon, in the beer parlor. One of the bartenders, a Mr. Castorelli, had one of the patrons tell him that the toilet was flooding in the men's washroom. So he went to investigate and found this device, which he thought was highly suspicious. So he notified the police, and two of them arrived to investigate it, and they came to the same conclusion, that it was not only suspicious, but it was probably a bomb.
Now, this is a pretty good representation of what they found in the tank at the Allison Hotel.
Yeah, this is a good replica of it, and it demonstrates the simplicity of these devices. What is here, the brown sugar stuff, is what you get when you unravel a stick of dynamite. There's a battery in here which provides the power source, and there's also a pocket watch, which you can see there with one hand removed and a screw screwed into the faceplate. So if you connect the wires to the screw to the battery, and then buried in the sugary stuff, there's a detonator. Then you stuff some paper in the top so that it won't rattle around, and you seal it as you would with a jar of peaches with the wide-mouth mason lid. It's then waterproof. You can immerse it in water or strap it to anything, and you've got about 11 hours of time to detonate it, because when the hand goes around and touches the little screw in the face, the circuit's completed and you
bang,
get an explosion.
How did they handle this bomb situation in the Allison Hotel?
Well, having taken it out of the washroom and into the back alley, one of the constables took the lid off and pulled the paper out and saw the wires, and he just yanked some of the wires out. And then Constable Brecknell, not knowing what to do with the bomb, decided he would simply take it back to the police office. So he got in his police car and drove it there with it between his knees. It was later further dismantled and studied, but in the meantime he had received a letter of commendation in the mail for his bravery, as it was called, in saving the hotel from a large explosion. And in the same mail also got a strong reprimand criticizing him for doing something so incredibly dangerous, for which he was not the slightest trained.
You're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Yes.
So they've now got a bomb that didn't go off, but in the early hours of the next morning, the 29th, in Kelowna, a bomb does go off.
Yes, and again, in a hotel, in a toilet tank, in a washroom. This hotel was the Willow Inn Hotel, which was at that time the bus depot also. And in the washroom, it exploded. And it was a large explosion that blew the back wall of the bus depot right across the alley, a great distance. It was a concrete block construction and caused much damage on the inside of the hotel.
So we have bomb blast on a telephone pole, bomb discovered aboard the Lequim ferry, bomb discovered at the Allison Hotel in Vernon, and a bomb blast in Kelowna at the Willow Inn Hotel, all but on the 28th and 29th of June.
Yes.
Going to take a break here and come back in a second to find out how the investigation goes with all of this activity. Welcome back to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts talking with Brian Weddle, who was a lawyer in 1958 working on this criminal conspiracy case. And the 29th of June, obviously, the police in Kelowna have a lot on their plate.
Yes, they do indeed, and they took some rather unusual steps, moving quickly as they did. They assigned 2 senior and experienced investigators to do nothing else but investigate these incidents. And in the course of that investigation, of course, they had the remnants of the bombs that had exploded. They had the remnants and the pieces of the Allison Hotel bomb, the replica of which sits there, and a lot of other debris and, of course, tips that they were getting from various sources. And on that, they started and worked hard.
Now, nothing really happened in the case that could be sort of identified publicly until 8 days later, July the 8th, before anybody is arrested.
Yes, their investigation had led them to stores that might have sold some of the parts, one of which was the pocket watch that was in the bomb. And they found a witness who thought they could identify one of the person who was later charged, a John Antifave, as being a person who bought the watch. And they discovered it was bought at the Mac and Mac store in Kelowna. We have a receipt similar to the one that was later discovered when they executed a search warrant at a residence, which showed a purchase on June the 28th for $3.62. And that got you a pocket watch in those days.
So somebody at this residence bought a pocket watch, and it could have been the one in the bomb.
Yes, well, they had enough evidence to apply for a search warrant, which was granted, and then that led them to a residence in Winfield, occupied by the Conkin brothers, Alec and Sam. And when they executed that search warrant, they found a large number of components that were similar or could have been used in the construction of bombs. They then, of course, seized all of these items and conducted a further investigation, which later led to the arrest of the two Conkin brothers.
So who are the guys that are arrested now?
Well, we now have 5 who the police suspect were involved in what they then said was the conspiracy. They had the two Conkin brothers, Sam and Alec. They had John Antifave. They had John Nazaroff and George Woykin. They had all been together, according to the police investigation and the witnesses that they interviewed the night before these explosions occurred. And with the identification evidence leading to the sale of what the police said were the component parts of the Allison Hotel bomb, they felt they had enough to charge a conspiracy and did so.
Now, these guys are arrested and incarcerated in the Kamloops jail. When did they go to trial?
Well, they were set to go to trial at the Fall Assizes in Vernon, which traditionally were held in November. And that was when, in fact, they did have their trial in November in Vernon at the Fall Assizes.
The coverage is extensive. When we look through the newspapers of the time, this is front page headlines and then the story continuing inside the body of the paper.
Yes, it was a unique trial because it had not happened before in this province, so it was extremely newsworthy, and of course it involved royalty, it involved what we now call terrorism, it involved an area of the province that had been immune from this kind of activity since its inception. It had all the elements of a great front page story.
Okay, we'll take a break here and come back and take a look at how this court case progressed. Some interesting forensic evidence been found. We'll do that right after this break. Welcome back to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Brian Weddle, at the time a lawyer on the team of lawyers making the case for conspiracy against these 5 members of the Doukabor sect. November the 12th, we're at the Vernon Courthouse. How does the case proceed?
Well, the Crown had by this time elected to charge a conspiracy, and that of course necessitates the Crown proving that all of these 5 were in agreement or made an agreement to either cause these explosions or collect the materials to make the bombs.
How did they do?
Well, they did well in respect of a number of instances. For instance, the actual bomb itself, as we saw earlier, had packing paper on the top of it that was put in to keep the components from rattling around. Mm-hmm. If you unfold that piece of paper that you just extracted there, you'll see that one edge is not machined, it is torn. Now, another piece of paper was found at the time they executed the search warrant at the Conkin residence with identical or similar staining, And the lab experts, when they examined it, were able to position the cut marks in the tear. In fact, they fitted together so perfectly that if you tilted it slightly, you couldn't see that there was a tear there at all.
So that proves that the part of the bomb was associated with the house, insofar as that's where that paper came from.
Yes, exactly. And the pocket watch, which is in there, they thought by the prosecutors to be traced directly to John Antifave, as there was a witness who almost identified him positively. She identified him, but with a slight degree of doubt in the positiveness of her identification, but sufficient, thought the Crown, to enable to bring home liability to him, or at least to have the jury decide that it was he, in fact, who had bought this watch that ultimately ended up on the inside of the bomb.
What does that do to, well, isn't the phrase reasonable doubt?
It is indeed, and it's up to the jury to draw the inference whether or not that identification was strong enough that they could rely on it as a positive identification. And it was up to them to decide whether they would or not. As it turned out, they didn't.
So they have evidence of the purchase of mason jars. They have evidence of a purchase of a watch. They have evidence of a purchase of other commodities, yet they can't tie them to these 5 people.
No, they obviously they didn't by their verdict. At the end of the Crown's case, it's an option procedurally for the accused to apply to the judge to have the case against him or them dismissed on the ground that they're lacking in proof of an essential ingredient necessary to found the conviction. That was done on behalf of all of them, but the judge decided that with respect to Antifave, Nazaroff, and Woykin, it would succeed. So the jury was instructed that there was no case against those 3, and they were acquitted at the end of the Crown's case. With respect to the remaining 2, the trial proceeded. And at the end of the case, the jury decided that they found Alex Konkin guilty, but couldn't agree with respect to the other Konkin brother, and had what we call a hung jury. A jury, of course, verdict has to be unanimous in our country, and they couldn't unanimously agree on that one. So he would be discharged and bound over until the next assize or the next trial. As far as I know, the Attorney General decided that he wouldn't proceed to try him again, and never did.
So this conspiracy case is not found by the prosecution. Only one individual, Alex Konkin, is convicted, but on a much reduced charge.
Well, I think he probably got the possession one, for which there is a maximum penalty of 14 years. That is, possession of explosive substances and the like.
Yeah.
But he escaped the more serious conviction, which was causing the explosion, or the conspiracy to cause an explosion.
Is there any theory about who else might have been around at the time to conspire to blow up these places?
Well, there's certainly a theory, and it was unusual because while these people were in custody, and while they were unable to make bail, there were further explosions in other parts of the valley that were going on. There was a bomb that went off on the CNR tracks between Winfield and Oyama. There was a bomb that blew up on railroad tracks north of Oliver. There was an incident at the Oliver Post Office, the Asilius Post Office, and an office building in Vernon. All of these occurring when it couldn't have been these 5 involved because they were in jail.
And as a matter of fact, on an event on the 13th of August led police to who could have been a co-conspirator with Konkin.
There were 2 people involved in that incident. One was a chap called Harry Boji, and the other was a chap called Philip Pereverasov. It would appear, as later investigation revealed, that they were in the process of assembling one of these explosive devices at a remote location at McKinley's Landing. That they were hunched down, crouched over this bomb when it exploded. The explosion killed Pereverasov and severely injured Boji, and it blinded him. he was able to survive for 3 days, and he did that by crawling or hauling himself across the ground to the vehicle that they had arrived in and draining the radiator fluid from the tap radiator drain cock in the bottom of the radiator and drinking on it. He was ultimately found 3 days later and taken to hospital. He was arrested, of course, and held in custody in the hospital. And thereby is another unusual quirk of fate that resulted in the case that ultimately took place in respect of him. And what happened was that there was a young Mountie on strength at the Kelowna detachment who had recently graduated from the police academy in Regina and had just arrived in Kelowna. He hadn't been assigned any particular duty, so when this event occurred, he was assigned to guard Boji in the hospital, and he did so. One of the visitors that Boji had were his parents, and they came to visit and started discussing the matter with him in the hospital, talking in Russian. Unbeknownst to them and everyone else around, this young constable spoke fluent Russian. The people thought that he couldn't understand, and he didn't let on that he could, but he took out a notebook and started making notes, as he was taught to do, of course, in police
Good police
college.
work.
Good police work indeed. And when he was asked what he was doing by one of the people there, he said, well, I'm writing a letter to my parents because I've just moved here and telling them what it's like in this part of the world. In actual fact, what was said was that the father of Boji asked him, what were you doing? And they talked about making a bomb. And he said, Boji said the bomb was for the bridge. His father said, what bridge? And Boji said, the Princess Margaret Bridge, obviously referring to the Okanagan Lake Bridge, which Her Royal Highness had just opened on the 16th of July.
We've got two teams of bombers working in the Okanagan. Konkin and whoever he was with, and Boji and Paraverisov. Could there have been more?
There could well have, because the history of the explosions of this particular Doukabor sect were such that it was almost impossible to determine any overall agreement amongst all of them that explosion A was to be called on such a date, explosion B on such a date. They didn't seem ever to have that degree of organization amongst them, and it was quite conceivable that they were all acting individually.
Brian Weddle, thank you very much for bringing this story to our attention.
Pleasure.
Is it going to be part of articles or books from you in the near future?
Well, hopefully so.
Thank you very much. Brian Weddle, retired provincial court judge and a lawyer on the team that tried this case back in 1958 here in the Okanagan. See you again next time on Pioneers and Places.